But in the very fact that the ascetic ideal has meant so much to man, lies expressed the fundamental feature of man's will, his horror vacui. He needs a goal, and he will sooner will nothingness than not will at all. Welcome to part 4 of our discussion on Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals. This video will deal with the third and final essay of the genealogy entitled, What is the Meaning of Ascetic Ideals? If you haven't watched the previous parts, we highly recommend you do so before watching this one. With that said, let's jump in and see where the conclusion of the genealogy takes us. As it stands, we can quickly summarize the content of the previous two essays as follows. In the first essay, we saw how the slave revolt and morals overthrew the earlier morality of so-called nobles, which is simply another word for the powerful or the aristocracy. We saw how the concepts of good and evil gained a metaphysical, moral significance rather than just being descriptors of what is useful or practical. And we saw how Nietzsche used ancient Rome as an example of master morality and juxtaposed it with Christianity, which exemplifies slave morality. In the second essay, Nietzsche is more concerned with individual psychology. We saw how man's instinctive drive for cruelty was prevented from finding an external outlet. Why? Because in order to live in civilization, man needs to give up his desire for exhibiting cruelty. But if this desire cannot be discharged outwards, it will be discharged inwards. This was the birth of a bad conscience, simultaneously a source of pleasure but also a source of torture. The bad conscience is man's instinct for cruelty turned on himself. What happens is that man inflicts suffering upon himself and, consequently, needs to find meaning in this suffering in order to make it bearable. This meaning of suffering is religion, and in the Christian faith we find the most well-developed doctrine of the meaning of suffering. So much so that in Christianity, not the material world of the here and now is of supreme importance, but the world beyond, the afterlife. Note also how in Christianity it is believed that man is born in sin. Man is born with a bad conscience right from the start. The third essay, the subject of this video, will deal with the grand conclusion of the genealogy. In the third and final essay, Nietzsche explores the psychology of the ascetic. The ascetic is the priest or monk who voluntarily inflicts suffering upon himself by not eating, not drinking, being chaste, avoiding pleasure and seeking pain. The saint or holy person in Christianity represents the perfection of the ascetic ideal, and it is these three things, the saint, the ascetic, and the ideals of the ascetic, that Nietzsche is primarily concerned with in this essay. The essay is notoriously hectic, as Nietzsche jumps from one point to the next and tackles such a wide range of phenomena from Wagner's art to Schopenhauer's philosophy, from Plato to Homer, from Kantian aesthetics to Indian priests, that summarizing it is effectively impossible. In this video, we will try and uncover the main thread throughout the essay and explain it in clear language without necessarily following each and every tangent Nietzsche goes on. One sentence keeps coming back again and again throughout the essay. What is the meaning of ascetic ideals? Throughout the essay, Nietzsche gives several examples in which aesthetic ideals manifest themselves in different types of men. The ascetic ideal in the artist, the philosopher, the aesthete, the priest, etc. But even though the question keeps coming back, Nietzsche has given the answer already in section 1 of the essay, in the form of an aphorism. Man will sooner will nothingness than not will at all. This is the central thought that should be kept in mind as we go on, that the ascetic ideal is somehow linked with a will to nothingness. What does that mean exactly? We'll have to find out. As Nietzsche explained in the foreword to the Genealogy, an aphorism properly coined and cast into its final mold is far from being deciphered as soon as it has been read. On the contrary, it is then that it first requires to be expounded. Of course, for that purpose, an art of exposition is necessary. The third essay in this book provides an example of what is offered, of what in such cases I call exposition. An aphorism is prefixed to that essay. The essay itself is its commentary. With all of this in mind, let's explore the Genealogy's final essay, the ascetic ideal. The ascetic ideal is the conviction that this world, the material world, the here and now, is to be discarded as evil at worst or irrelevant at best. Instead, the ascetic ideal praises some kind of hinterwelt, literally beyond world, which is the true object of existence. Christians, for example, believe in heaven or the afterlife. For Schopenhauer, this hinterwelt becomes the world as will, and for Kant, the hinterwelt is the thing in itself. The right course of action for the ascetic is therefore to negate the material world. The ascetic achieves this by living in poverty, being chaste, fasting, avoiding pleasure, and seeking pain. However, Nietzsche's point in this essay is that this ascetic ideal will take on new forms, new manifestations throughout history. But even more importantly, Nietzsche shows us how apparently different manifestations all result from the same drive towards self-denial in the material world with the hope of a better outcome in some other world or hinterwelt. The question then becomes, what lays beneath this drive to self-denial? But first, Nietzsche explores the ascetic ideal as it manifests itself in 4 classes of people: artists, philosophers, priests, and scholars. It is with the ascetic priest that we find the ultimate kind of asceticism. The priest, or rather the monk, who gives up all earthly pleasures, who denies himself completely. The priest truly lives an ascetic life. But what does that mean? The idea is the value of our life from the standpoint of the ascetic priests. This life, then, together with the whole of which it is a part, nature, the world, the whole sphere of becoming and passing away, is placed by them in relation to an existence of quite another character, which it excludes and to which it is opposed, unless it deny its own self. In this case, the case of an ascetic life, life is taken as bridge to another existence. The ascetic treats life as a maze, in which one must walk backwards till one comes to the place where it starts. Or he treats it as an error, which one may, nay, must refute by action. Nietzsche's psychology of the priest takes up the bulk of the third essay, and his treatment of the ascetic priest is paradoxical. On the one hand, Nietzsche believes the priest confirms those values which Nietzsche deems to be degenerative and sick: self-denial, life-denial, negative virtue. Yet, on the other hand, Nietzsche clearly admires the willpower it takes to achieve this priestly ideal. You cannot, in fact, but admire the counterfeiter dexterity with which the stamp of virtue, even the ring, the golden ring of virtue, is here imitated. They have taken a lease of virtue absolutely for themselves. They stalk about in our midst as living reproaches, as warnings to us, as though health, fitness, strength, pride, the sensation of power were really vicious things in themselves, for which one would have some day to do penance, bitter penance. This paradox is easily solvable though, because a major point of the essay is that the priest is simply, secretly, in a backhanded way, striving for power, because right after the aforementioned quote we read the following: "Oh, how they themselves are ready in their hearts to exact penance, how they thirst after being hangmen." Guilt and bad conscience. In the previous essay, we saw how humanity internalized guilt and suffering and called it a bad conscience. We also saw how this is a kind of internalized cruelty, a cruelty which we inflict upon ourselves. And then religion comes along and tells us a story for how our suffering is actually meaningful and thus justified. In the third essay, Nietzsche exposes the role of the priest in the story. The priest justifies the feelings of guilt felt by the masses from a position of social authority. The priest leads from the front in the glorification of suffering, in the glorification of life denial, the glorification of the hinterwelt, of the world beyond. The priest empowers the weak by assigning the highest value to their sufferings, while at the same time celebrating and discharging his own power in being at the cause of such a transformation. In other words, the priest soothes the weak and delights in the power he is granted when the weak, in turn, give him authority over their moral well-being. In this way, the priest celebrates the will to power for himself, but denies it when engaging with the masses. This is the paradoxical nature of the priest, and also why Nietzsche both hates and admires the priest. Ascetic ideals in science. But we're not done yet. In the final quarter of the essay, after having traced the ascetic ideal all the way through examples of artists, philosophers, and priests, Nietzsche discusses scholars, or scientists, as we would say today. Aren't scientists, these dispassionate searchers for truth, finally liberated from this desire for asceticism? Modern science, which, like the genuine reality philosophy which it is, manifestly believes in itself alone, manifestly has the courage to be itself, the will to be itself, and has got on well enough without God, another world, and negative virtues. Of course, Nietzsche will argue that, despite their vocal protestations to the contrary, scientists or scholars still fall victim to the very same drives and instincts as the priests. They are not opponents of the ascetic ideal, even if they say they are. But why? These solitaries and deniers of today, these fanatics in one thing, in their claim to intellectual cleanness, these hard, stern, continent, heroic spirits who constitute the glory of our time, all these pale atheists, anti-Christians, immoralists, nihilists, these skeptics, these supreme idealists of knowledge, in whom alone nowadays the intellectual conscience dwells and is alive. In point of fact, they believe themselves as far away as possible from the ascetic ideal, do these free, very free spirits. And yet, if I may reveal what they themselves cannot see, for they stand too near themselves, this ideal is simply their ideal. They represent it nowadays and perhaps no one else. They themselves are its most spiritualized product, its most advanced picket of skirmishes and scouts, its most insidious, delicate and elusive form of seduction. If I am in any way a reader of riddles, then I will be one with this sentence: For some time past there have been no free spirits, for they still believe in truth. A belief in truth is exposed here as the latest manifestation of the ascetic ideal. On its face, this is a very strange thing to say. So, let's explore this topic further. The belief in an objective truth is simply a roundabout way of believing in metaphysics. Without realizing it, the scientist believes in a foundation which finds justification outside of science. In other words, science does not believe in itself alone, even if they don't realize this themselves. Scientists have a will to truth. They work in the realization of this ideal, the idea that truth is better than untruth. Historically, this belief was well founded to the point of being religious dogma. In the past, truth was equated with being, which was equated with the good. This is Plato's legacy in Western philosophy, a legacy which then transformed into the Christian ideal. In the Bible, we even find Jesus as saying, "I am the truth." But the scientist does not believe in God or metaphysics. The scientist is concerned with this world and not the next, not some metaphysical hinterwelt or transcendental God. But this leaves the scientist in a very strange position. On the one hand, he believes in the objective value of some kind of metaphysical truth, but on the other hand, he swears off any religious or metaphysical pretensions. Turn in this context to the most ancient and most modern philosophers. They all fail to realize the extent of the need of a justification on the part of the will for truth. Here is a gap in every philosophy. What is it caused by? Because up to the present, the ascetic ideal dominated all philosophy, because truth was fixed as being, as God, as the supreme court of appeal, because truth was not allowed to be a problem. Do you understand this allowed? From the minute that the belief in the God of the ascetic ideal is repudiated, there exists a new problem, the problem of the value of truth. The will for truth needed a critique. Let us define by these words our own task. The value of truth is tentatively to be called in question. The will to truth. Nietzsche is not saying that truth is impossible. Rather, he accuses scientists of placing a certain value on truth while simultaneously not believing in the conditions that would make the valuation justified. The scientist, someone who studies the physical world, does not believe in metaphysics. Yet a belief in metaphysics is necessary to underpin a truth value that can justify the scientific project. In simpler terms, the scientist must believe that truth is better than untruth. This is not a scientific claim, but a metaphysical one. Yet the scientist will say he does not believe in metaphysics whatsoever. This is where Nietzsche's accusation comes in. The scientist does believe in a certain kind of metaphysics, even if he says he does not. This implicit will to truth is then, for Nietzsche, simply another manifestation of the ascetic ideal, the very thing the scientist claims to be against. But what forces it into that unqualified will for truth is the faith in the ascetic ideal itself, even though it take the form of its unconscious imperatives. Make no mistake about it, it is the faith, I repeat, in a metaphysical value, an intrinsic value of truth, of a character which is only warranted and guaranteed in this ideal. It stands and falls with that ideal. Nietzsche makes his case further by claiming that modern science and religious asceticism are each other's firmest allies, because, at the end of the day, They both seek to negate man, and they both seek to negate life. He uses the example of the Copernican revolution, the revelation that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Has there not been since the time of Copernicus an unbroken progress in the self-belittling of man and his will for belittling himself? Alas, his belief in his dignity, his uniqueness, his irreplaceableness in the scheme of existence is gone. He has become animal, literal, unqualified, unmitigated animal. Since Copernicus, man seems to have fallen on to a steep plane. He rolls faster and faster away from the center. Whither? Into nothingness? Into the thrilling sensation of his own nothingness? Well, this would be the straight way to the old ideal. Nothing has really changed, according to Nietzsche. Christianity has told us we are nothing compared to God, that the material world is but a preparation, that mankind is really nothing special, sinful even. Schopenhauer said mostly the same thing. Mankind is just the manifestation of a cruel, irrational will to life, and non-existence is preferable to existence. And now, science comes along and kicks man off his pedestal. We are not the center of the universe. We do not even have a special place in the animal kingdom. As Darwin has shown, we are simply animals, genes, DNA. Only quantitatively do we differ from the other animals, not qualitatively. In the end, we are simply evolved monkeys and nothing more. Nietzsche even accuses the scientist of finding enjoyment in this debasement of mankind, just like the priest before him. All science, and by no means only astronomy, all science nowadays sets out to talk man out of his present opinion of himself, as though that opinion had been nothing but a bizarre piece of conceit. You might go so far as to say that science finds its peculiar pride, its peculiar bitter form of stoical ataraxia in preserving man's contempt of himself. Where does this leave us? Suffering and meaning. Nietzsche has shown that the projects of philosophy, science, religion, academia, morality all amount to the same thing. They are all reformulations of the same ascetic ideal. But why do we humans so persistently seek that which causes our suffering, that which causes our debasement, which feeds our self-hatred? Why is the ascetic ideal an ideal in the first place, something we should strive towards as if it's good? The short answer is because the ascetic ideal, even though it causes us great suffering, nevertheless gives meaning to our existence. Let's go back to the most important sentence of the essay, the first aphorism out of which the rest of the essay follows. Man would rather will nothingness than not will at all. In the final section of the essay and of the genealogy as a whole, we read, "If you accept the ascetic ideal, the animal man had no meaning. His existence on earth contained no end. What is the purpose of man at all was a question without an answer. The will for man and the world was lacking. Behind every great human destiny rang as a refrain a still greater vanity." The ascetic ideal simply means this, that something was lacking, that a tremendous void encircled man. He did not know how to justify himself, to explain himself, to affirm himself. He suffered from the problem of his own meaning. To what purpose do we suffer? Man, the bravest animal and the one most inured to suffering, does not repudiate suffering in itself. He wills it, he even seeks it out, provided that he has shown a meaning for it, a purpose of suffering. Not suffering, but the senselessness of suffering was the curse which till then lay spread over humanity, and the ascetic ideal gave it a meaning. The ascetic ideal provides us meaning for our suffering, and man needs meaning more than anything else. It was, up till then, the only meaning, but any meaning is better than no meaning. You could say Nietzsche's entire project consists of finding a better meaning, a new meaning, one that does not cause more suffering in the process as the ascetic ideal does. But this project of creating a new meaning is not for the genealogy. As we said in the very first part of this series, the genealogy is concerned with history. Therefore, Nietzsche does not tell us what this new meaning might entail. Instead, the genealogy ends with the following sentence: a will for nothingness, a will opposed to life, a repudiation of the most fundamental conditions of life, but it is and remains a will, and to say at the end that which I said at the beginning, man will wish nothingness rather than not wish at all. Might we discover, or even create, something better to strive towards? That will be Nietzsche's great challenge to us. But that is the subject for another video. With this will to nothingness, we end our series on the genealogy of morals. We sincerely hope you found this series useful in your own learning process. This was a long and hard project to realize. If you like what we do and you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting. And if you want more people to see this, sharing this video is the best thing you could do. We are not done with Nietzsche yet, so please subscribe if you want more. And above all, thank you for watching.